She was 19 and sleeping inside the back room of a closed grocery store at the edge of a dying town. Every night, the old refrigerator compressors clicked like distant footsteps through the dark. The smell of spoiled cardboard and dust clung to the cold air around her. Rain leaked through cracks in the ceiling and landed in slow drops beside the blanket she slept under. Her name was Clara Whitmore, and everything she owned fit inside one faded blue backpack. 2 sweaters, a cracked phone that barely charged, a photograph of her grandmother, an envelope containing $8. That was all she had left after her mother passed away, and the bank emptied their apartment 2 weeks later. $8. Not enough for rent, not enough for food, not enough to start over. Most people would have spent on a meal, but Clara couldn't stop thinking about the small handwritten note folded inside the envelope. Go to Belmere Station. No explanation, no signature, just those 3 words written in faded blue ink. Belmere Station had been abandoned for almost 30 years. The old train depot sat nearly 40 miles outside town, surrounded by dead fields and broken power lines. People avoided it now. Teenagers used to sneak there for dares, but even they stopped after part of the roof collapsed years earlier. Still, the note felt important, like something her grandmother had wanted her to find. So on a freezing Thursday morning, Clara used the last $8 she had to buy an old rusted key from a flea market vendor near the bus station. The key had a tiny brass tag attached to it. Belmere Storage Room 14. The old man who sold it to her stared strangely when she asked where it came from. Then he quietly said something that stayed in her mind the entire bus ride. You're the first person to ask about that station in 20 years. But what Clara didn't know was that the key had been waiting for her long before she was born. And inside Belmere Station, something had been hidden for 3 generations. Something no one was supposed to find. Not until now. Before we continue, if stories like this pull you in the kind that uncover hidden truths, forgotten places, and emotional journeys that change lives, take a moment to subscribe. And while you watch, think about this. If someone left you one final clue before they were gone, would you follow it? Because Clara almost didn't. And if she had walked away that morning, she never would have learned the truth hidden beneath Belmere Station. Clara grew up inside small apartments that always smelled faintly of laundry soap and old coffee. Nothing in her life was stable for very long. Her father disappeared when she was 6. Her mother worked double shifts cleaning motel rooms along the highway. Most nights, Clara ate dinner alone while listening to the washing machine rattle against the wall. But every Sunday, her grandmother Eleanor visited, and somehow the apartment felt warmer when she arrived. Eleanor Whitmore always carried the same brown leather gloves no matter the season. Her silver hair was pinned carefully behind her ears, and she smelled like cedar wood and peppermint tea. She spoke softly, moved slowly, but her eyes noticed everything, especially old things. Broken watches, rusty locks, scratched furniture. She repaired things nobody else cared about. People throw away stories too easily. She used to tell Clara. As a little girl, Clara would sit beside her grandmother at the kitchen table, while Eleanor repaired clocks brought in by neighbors. The apartment would fill with tiny metallic sounds. Ticking, clicking, the turning of miniature screws. Eleanor's hands never shook while she worked, not even when she became sick years later. One winter evening, when Clara was 12, the power went out during a storm. The apartment became silent, except for rain tapping the windows. Eleanor lit a candle and opened an old wooden box Clara had never seen before. Inside were dozens of train tokens, faded station maps, and black and white photographs. One picture showed a young Eleanor standing beside a train platform with another man. He wore suspenders and held a toolbox. "Who's that?" Clara asked. Eleanor stared at the photograph for a long time before answering. "Your great-grandfather." "What did he do?" "He fixed things people depended on." That was all she said. Years later, Clara would remember the sadness in her voice more than the words themselves. After Clara turned 15, Eleanor's health started failing quickly. Her breathing became shallow. Her hands grew thinner, but she still repaired clocks whenever she could. One afternoon, Clara came home from school and found her grandmother sitting quietly beside the window, holding a small brass key. The exact same key Clara would later buy at the flea market. At the time, Clara barely noticed it. You ever feel like families leave pieces of themselves behind? Eleanor suddenly asked. Clara shrugged. I guess. Eleanor smiled weakly. Sometimes people hide things because they're afraid. Sometimes they hide things because they love someone. Then she slipped the key back into her coat pocket. That memory haunted Clara later, because after Eleanor died, the key vanished. So did most of her belongings. Clara's mother never spoke much about Eleanor after the funeral. Maybe because grief exhausted her. Maybe because some memories hurt too much. Then 6 months later, Clara's mother got sick too. Medical bills swallowed everything. The apartment disappeared. The savings disappeared. Almost overnight, Clara's entire life collapsed into survival. Cold nights, cheap food, temporary shelters, and eventually, the abandoned grocery store. Some nights she would lie awake listening to distant traffic outside and think about her grandmother's stories, about repairing broken things, about hidden pieces of family history, about Belmere Station. Because once, years earlier, Eleanor had whispered that name in her sleep. Clara remembered it clearly. Belmere. At the time, it meant nothing. Now it was the only clue she had left. The bus dropped Clara off 3 miles from the station just before sunset. The driver didn't even stop completely. He only opened the door long enough for her to step into the cold wind. Then the bus disappeared down the empty road. Silence swallowed everything after that. Fields stretched endlessly beneath gray skies. Dead grass bent with the wind. Telephone poles leaned crooked beside the road, like exhausted men. Clara pulled her sweater tighter and started walking. The farther she went, the quieter the world became. No cars. No houses. Nothing except wind moving through dry weeds. Then finally, she saw it. Belmere Station. The old depot sat beside abandoned train tracks, half buried in dirt and weeds. Parts of the roof had collapsed inward. Windows were shattered. Rust stained nearly every wall. It looked less like a building and more like the memory of one. Clara stopped walking. For a moment, she almost turned back. The place felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly. Just heavy, like time had stopped there. Then she noticed something strange. One window near the far side of the station looked cleaner than the others. Not clean, just less dirty, as if someone had touched it recently. A chill moved through her stomach. She stepped closer. The station door groaned loudly when she pushed it open. Dust floated through pale evening light. Old ticket booths stood empty beneath hanging wires. Somewhere deeper inside the building, water dripped slowly into metal. Clang, clang, clang. The sound echoed through the station like a clock counting down. Clara found storage room 14 near the back hallway beneath a faded sign barely hanging from the wall. The brass tag on the key matched perfectly. Her heart pounded as she slid it into the lock. At first, nothing happened. Then, click, the door opened inward. Inside was a tiny room covered in dust. Shelves lined the walls. Most were empty, but one shelf held an old toolbox, and beside it, a small pocket watch. Clara picked it up carefully. The watch had stopped at exactly 8:14. She turned it over. Engraved on the back were initials, T.W., Thomas Whitmore, her great-grandfather, the man from Eleanor's photograph. Clara stared at the watch while cold air drifted through cracks in the walls. Why was this here? And why had nobody touched it for decades? Then she noticed something else. The toolbox looked cleaner than everything around it. Not new, not polished, just recently handled. A knot tightened in her chest. Someone else had been here, maybe recently. Slowly, she opened the toolbox. Inside were railway tools wrapped carefully in cloth. Underneath them sat a folded station map, covered in handwritten markings, red circles, dates, numbers, and one sentence written near the bottom, below the platform. Clara frowned. Below what platform? Before she could think further, a loud metallic sound echoed somewhere outside the room. She froze instantly. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. moving somewhere inside the station. Clara held her breath. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a distant scraping sound dragged across concrete, somewhere deeper in the building. Every instinct told her to run, but curiosity rooted her in place. After several seconds, she stepped carefully into the hallway. Empty. Only shadows stretched across the cracked floor. Wind pushed softly through broken windows. Still, something felt off. Then she smelled it. Smoke. Very faint. Fresh smoke. Someone had been there recently. Clara followed the scent toward the old passenger platform outside. The wooden boards creaked beneath her feet. Many sections had collapsed from age. But near the far end of the platform, she noticed newer nails hammered into one section of wood. Not old rusted nails. Bright ones. Recent. Her pulse quickened again. Kneeling carefully, she touched the boards. One moved slightly under pressure. Loose, as if it had been lifted before. Then suddenly, a train horn echoed faintly across the distance. Clara jumped, but there were no trains anymore. The tracks had been dead for decades. The sound faded almost immediately, leaving only silence again. And beneath her feet, a hollow echo. She looked down slowly. Something was hidden underneath the platform. The sun disappeared completely by the time Clara found a rusted crowbar near the maintenance shed. Darkness settled heavily over Belmere Station. Wind rattled loose metal overhead. Every sound felt amplified. She returned to the loose platform boards and wedged the crowbar beneath the wood. The nails groaned loudly as she pulled. One board lifted, then another. Dust exploded upward. Below the platform was darkness, and a narrow ladder disappearing underground. Clara stared into the opening while cold air drifted upward, carrying the smell of earth, machine oil, and something older. Paper. Old paper. Her flashlight barely reached the bottom. For several seconds, she couldn't move. Every part of her knew she should leave. Call someone. Forget this place. But then she remembered her grandmother's voice. People throw away stories too easily. Slowly, Clara climbed down. The underground room was larger than she expected. Stone walls, wooden support beams, dust covering everything. But this wasn't random storage. It had been built carefully, deliberately. Shelves lined the walls filled with sealed metal boxes. An old desk sat in the corner beneath hanging lantern hooks. And on the desk lay a leather journal. Clara approached slowly. The cover cracked softly when she opened it. The first page read, Thomas Whitmore, Belmere Records. Her hands trembled. Inside were decades of handwritten entries from her great-grandfather, train schedules, repair notes, names, payments, and eventually, fear. One entry stopped Clara cold. If they find the money, they'll take everything. Eleanor must never know until the time is right. Clara turned pages faster. Then she understood. During the final years before Belmere Station shut down, Thomas Whitmore had secretly protected payroll funds and valuables during a corruption investigation involving railway officials. People were stealing worker pensions, disappearing with company money. Thomas hid the evidence and the remaining funds down here, but before he could expose anyone, he died suddenly in an accident near the tracks. The investigation vanished. The station closed. And the hidden room stayed forgotten. Until now, Clara looked around slowly. The metal boxes suddenly meant something very different. With shaking hands, she opened one. Inside were stacks of old cash bundles sealed in wax paper. Another box contained gold coins. Another held jewelry wrapped carefully in cloth. But it wasn't the money that made Clara cry. It was what she found inside the final box. Letters. Dozens of them, all addressed to Eleanor. Letters Thomas never had the chance to send. One letter had Eleanor's name written across the front in faded blue ink. Clara opened it carefully. Inside, Thomas had written, If Clara ever finds this someday, tell her our family was never poor in the ways that mattered. Tears blurred her vision instantly, because somehow he had written her name decades before she was born. The weeks after Belmere Station changed Clara slowly. Not magically, not instantly. The legal process alone took months. Investigators verified the hidden records. Lawyers traced the forgotten accounts. Much of the money legally belonged to surviving railway families. Clara cooperated fully, and because Thomas Whitmore had preserved evidence that protected missing pension records, a remaining portion of the hidden assets legally transferred to the Whitmore family estate. For the first time in years, Clara had stability, but money alone didn't fix her life overnight. She still struggled with fear, still woke up expecting everything to disappear, still carried her backpack everywhere for months. But something inside her shifted. She rented a tiny apartment above a repair shop downtown, and one afternoon, she noticed the owner repairing an old clock near the window. The sound instantly reminded her of Eleanor. Ticking, clicking, tiny metallic movements. Clara stood there quietly for a long time, then finally asked, "Could you teach me?" The old repairman looked surprised, but he smiled. And over the next year, Clara learned slowly how to repair clocks, how to restore watches, how to steady shaking hands. She made mistakes constantly, dropped screws, ruined springs, worked long nights frustrated and exhausted. But she kept going, because every repaired clock felt like reconnecting broken pieces of her family. Eventually, she opened a small workshop of her own. Nothing fancy, just warm lights, wood shelves, the smell of cedar oil and coffee. And above the front desk sat the pocket watch from Belmere Station, permanently frozen at 8:14. Customers often asked why she never repaired it. Clara always smiled softly. "Some things aren't broken," she would say. "They're reminders." People think hidden treasure changes lives because of money, but that wasn't what saved Clara. It was learning that her family's story hadn't ended in failure. For years, she believed everything connected to her past had collapsed. Her father left, her mother died, her grandmother suffered quietly, and she thought she had been abandoned by history itself. But Belmere Station revealed something different. Love had survived there. Patience had survived there. Sacrifice had survived there. 3 generations had carried pieces of the same story without fully understanding it. And somehow, those pieces found their way back together. Not because of luck, because someone cared enough to leave hope behind, even decades earlier. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what people leave in your hands. It's what they leave in your heart. A year later, Clara returned to Belmere Station one final time. The town planned to demolish it soon. Sunlight spilled across the old tracks, while wind moved softly through broken windows. The station no longer felt frightening, just tired. Clara stood quietly beside Platform 14, holding Eleanor's photograph in one hand. For several minutes, she said nothing. Then she looked toward the empty tracks, stretching into the distance. When she first arrived there, she had been homeless, hungry, completely alone. Now the fear inside her felt smaller somehow. Not gone, but quieter, like a storm finally moving away. Before leaving, Clara placed Thomas Whitmore's final letter carefully beneath the loose platform board where she had first climbed underground, not to hide it again, but to let part of the story remain there. Some places deserve to keep their memories. As she walked away from Belmere Station, the evening wind carried a distant metallic sound through the silence, almost like the faint ticking of a clock. And for the first time in a very long while, Clara smiled, because $8 had never really been an inheritance. The inheritance was knowing she came from people who refused to let hope disappear. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more emotional mystery journeys like this one. And in the comments, share something meaningful. What's one memory, object, or lesson from your family that you never forgot? Sometimes the smallest things carry the biggest stories.